Welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories. The spring of 1932 found Hercule Poirot in a state of mild discontent. The little Belgian detective sat in his immaculate London flat, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustaches waxed to perfection, and absolutely nothing of interest occupying his formidable intellect. "Hastings," he said to his friend, who had dropped by for tea, "the mind, it rusts without proper employment. Like a machine without oil, n'est-ce pas?" Captain Hastings looked up from his buttered scone. "Surely you're not wishing for another murder, Poirot?" "Not wishing, no. But when the little grey cells are not exercised, they grow sluggish." He adjusted a picture frame on the mantelpiece with geometrical precision. "One requires problems, Hastings, puzzles. The challenge of the human mind at its most complex." At that precise moment, as if summoned by Poirot's restlessness, the Morning Post arrived. Among the usual correspondence was a cream-coloured envelope bearing Iraqi stamps. Poirot slit it open with his paper knife and extracted a letter written in an elegant, scholarly hand. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, you will perhaps remember me from the British Museum lecture series last autumn. I am writing from the Al-Qadir excavation site, 40 miles south of Baghdad, where I am directing the dig of what we believe to be a significant Assyrian palace complex. I find myself in an awkward position. There have been certain irregularities here. Items have gone missing. There are tensions among the team that I cannot quite account for. Nothing I can put my finger on. Yet I have the distinct feeling that something is very wrong. The Iraqi authorities have been most hospitable, but this is a delicate matter. We cannot afford scandal. It would set back archaeological relations by decades. Yet I fear that without intervention, we may be heading toward catastrophe. Would you consider joining us for a few weeks? I can offer modest accommodations, fascinating company, and the opportunity to see one of the great discoveries of our age. And perhaps, with your particular gifts, you might untangle whatever web is being woven here. I remain, with great respect, Professor Edmund Whitmore, Director." Al-Qadir Expedition Hastings had read over his shoulder. "I say, Poirot, Iraq! How tremendously exciting!" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You observe, Hastings, the careful phrasing. Irregularities. Tensions. He does not say what troubles him, yet the unease, it is palpable, no? Ancient Assyria, though. Palaces and treasures. Rather like digging up Nineveh. It is not the archaeology that interests Poirot, my friend. It is the psychology. The professor, he is a man of science, of facts. For such a man to write such a letter, to admit he cannot account for what he observes, c'est remarkable. Then you'll go?" Poirot permitted himself a small smile. "But naturally, one cannot resist such an invitation. The grey cells, they cry out for employment." And so, within a fortnight, Hercule Poirot found himself aboard the Taurus Express, crossing from Syria into Iraq, the ancient land of Mesopotamia stretching before him in shades of gold and ochre under a relentless sun. The expedition compound at Al-Qadir was a curious blend of ancient and modern. The dig itself sprawled across a low tell, an artificial mound built up over millennia, where the remains of an Assyrian palace were gradually emerging from the earth. Around the excavation site clustered a collection of mud brick buildings and sturdy tents that served as living quarters, workrooms, and storage. Professor Whitmore, a tall, stooped man in his 60s with sun-weathered features and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, met Poirot at the motor car that had brought him from Baghdad. "Monsieur Poirot, you cannot know what a relief it is to see you." He shook hands vigorously. "The journey was not too arduous, I trust. I have survived, Professor. Though I confess the dust, it is everywhere. I shall be washing it from my moustaches for weeks." Whitmore laughed, though there was tension behind it. "Come, let me show you to your quarters. They're simple but clean. Then you must meet the team." As they walked through the compound, Poirot observed with his characteristic attention to detail. The site was orderly, well organized. Local workers moved purposefully about their tasks, yet there was something in the air, a quality he could not quite define. Wariness, perhaps. People avoided each other's eyes. "You have a large team, Professor?" "Smaller than I'd like, but sufficient. There's my assistant director, Dr. Marcus Aldridge, brilliant epigraphist, reads cuneiform like English. Then we have Jennifer Clayton, our archaeological illustrator. She does magnificent work. Young Timothy Brennan handles the pottery cataloguing and stratigraphy. Mrs. Vera Sutcliffe oversees the conservation of artifacts and runs our small darkroom for photographs. All British, mostly, though we have excellent cooperation from the Iraqi Antiquities Department. Sheikh Ibrahim al-Mansour serves as our liaison. Charming man, very helpful. And we have 24 local workers, supervised by our foreman, Hassan ibn Rashid. They reached a small but scrupulously clean mud brick room. "Your accommodation, Monsieur Poirot. I hope it will suffice." Poirot examined the narrow bed with its mosquito netting, the simple washstand, the small table and chair. "It is adequate, Professor. Now perhaps you will tell me, what exactly troubles you?" Whitmore sank into the only chair, suddenly looking his age. "It started 3 weeks ago. Small things at first. A cylinder seal vanished from the fines room. Significant, but not irreplaceable. Then a section of Jennifer's drawings went missing from her portfolio. Money disappeared from Timothy's tent. Theft, then. That's what I thought. But there's more. The atmosphere has changed. People who work together harmoniously are now suspicious, secretive. Dr. Aldridge and Mrs. Sutcliffe barely speak, though they were quite friendly before. Timothy has become morose. Even Jennifer, who's usually cheerful, seems nervous. And you, Professor, what is it that you fear?" Whitmore met his eyes. "I fear that someone here is not who they claim to be. I fear that our discoveries have attracted the wrong sort of attention. And I fear," he paused, "this will sound melodramatic, but I fear that unless something changes, there will be violence." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then it is fortunate that Poirot has arrived, n'est-ce pas? Now, you must arrange for me to meet your colleagues. Casually, naturally. Perhaps at dinner tonight. Of course. We all dine together in the main tent at 7. It's one of our few civilizations in this wilderness." After Whitmore departed, Poirot unpacked his belongings with meticulous care. He had brought a limited wardrobe suitable for the climate. Lighter suits than usual, though still immaculate. As he arranged his toilet articles with geometric precision on the washstand, he reflected on what he had learned. A small, isolated community. Valuable antiquities. Theft and suspicion. It was a recipe for trouble, certainly. But was it simply opportunistic criminality, or was something more complex at work? The little grey cells would tell him. They always did. Dinner that evening was served in what Professor Whitmore called the mess tent. A large canvas structure with rough tables and camp chairs, made surprisingly comfortable with cushions and carpets. An Iraqi cook had prepared an acceptable meal of lamb, rice and vegetables, followed by tinned fruit. Poirot found himself seated between Jennifer Clayton and Timothy Brennan. with an excellent view of the other diners. Jennifer was a woman in her early 30s, with intelligent hazel eyes and sun-bleached brown hair, pulled back practically. She wore khaki trousers and a cotton shirt, sensible clothing for the dig, and had a directness that Poirot found refreshing. Professor Whitmore says you're here to see the excavation. Monsieur Poirot, are you interested in Assyrian archaeology? I confess, mademoiselle, my knowledge is limited, but I am fascinated by all things that reveal the human character. And what is archaeology but the study of humanity through the ages, no? She smiled at that. What a lovely way to put it. Yes, that's exactly what it is. These people lived and loved and quarrelled 3,000 years ago, and we're piecing together their stories from broken pottery and ruined walls. You are an artist, I understand. An illustrator. I draw what we find. The pottery, the cylinder seals, the architectural features. Sometimes I do reconstructions, showing what the palace might have looked like in its glory. Her enthusiasm was genuine, lighting up her face. It's like bringing the past to life. And you enjoy your work here? A shadow crossed her features. Usually, though lately. She stopped, glancing around the table. Well, it's been a difficult few weeks. Poirot said nothing, simply looked at her with polite inquiry. Things have gone missing. People are on edge. It's not how an expedition should be. She lowered her voice. Between you and me, I think someone has been going through my things. Nothing taken, but rearranged. It's unsettling. You suspect someone in particular? She hesitated. I don't like to cast aspersions, but Mrs. Sutcliffe has been acting strangely, very secretive. And she has access to everything. She's always in the finds room cataloguing and photographing. Before Poirot could respond, Timothy Brennan addressed him from his other side. The young man was perhaps 25, with an earnest face and nervous hands that constantly fidgeted with his napkin. You're the detective chap, aren't you? Whitmore said you might visit. I am Hercule Poirot, yes. And you are interested in pottery, Mr. Brennan? Pottery sherds, mainly. Stratigraphy, too. Working out which layers are which. Dating the occupation phases. He spoke rapidly, defensively. It's exacting work. Essential, really. Not as glamorous as finding gold. But without proper recording, archaeology is just treasure hunting. Bien sûr. Method and order. They are everything, are they not? Exactly. But try telling that to some people. He shot a resentful glance across the table toward Dr. Aldridge. Some people think only their work matters. Dr. Marcus Aldridge was perhaps 40, with dark hair silvering at the temples and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to academic success. He was deep in conversation with Sheikh Ibrahim, apparently oblivious to Brennan's hostility. Dr. Aldridge does not appreciate your contributions? Poirot asked gently. He treats me like a glorified clerk. Record this, Timothy. Catalogue that, Timothy. Never mind that I have ideas of my own. Never mind that I've published 2 papers on Assyrian ceramics. The young man's voice was bitter. He's the great Marcus Aldridge, you see. The man who can read the mind of ancient kings through their cuneiform texts. The rest of us are merely supporting players. That must be frustrating. You don't know the half of it. Brennan leaned closer, his voice dropping. And between you and me, I don't think he's as brilliant as everyone believes. Some of his translations, well, I'm not an epigraphist, but they seem questionable. Too convenient, if you know what I mean. Poirot murmured something non-committal and turned his attention to the wider table. Mrs. Vera Sutcliffe sat near the head next to Professor Whitmore. She was a handsome woman of about 50, with iron-grey hair and a brisk, no-nonsense manner. She wore a linen dress that had once been fashionable, but was now faded by sun and sand. "More tea, Professor?" she asked, already pouring. "You look exhausted. You're working too hard." "Someone must keep the ship afloat, Vera." But Whitmore smiled at her with genuine warmth. "What would we do without you? Find yourselves in chaos, I expect." But she was pleased. "I've catalogued the cylinder seals from Trench 7. Quite remarkable pieces. I photographed them all. The images came out beautifully." "Excellent. We'll need those for the museum report." Dr. Aldridge looked up from his conversation. "Speaking of which, Vera, I need the seal impressions from last week. The ones with the bull motif. I'm working on a paper about royal symbolism." "They're in the fines room, properly stored where they should be." Her tone was chilly. "You know where everything is, Marcus." "I thought perhaps you'd have them in your darkroom. You seemed quite possessive about them. I was photographing them. That's my job." 2 spots of colour appeared on her cheeks. "Unlike some people, I take my responsibilities seriously." Meaning that when tablets go missing, one begins to wonder about priorities. An uncomfortable silence fell. Professor Whitmore intervened hastily. Now, nothing's actually missing, just temporarily misplaced. These things happen on a dig, do they?" Mrs. Sutcliffe's voice was tight. "In all my years of expeditions, I've never known such carelessness." Sheikh Ibrahim, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke in excellent English with a melodious accent. "Perhaps, my friends, we should not trouble our distinguished guest with these small difficulties. Monsieur Poirot has come far to see our great discovery. Let us speak instead of the palace, of what we have learned about the ancient kings." The sheikh was a man of perhaps 50, with an aristocratic bearing and thoughtful dark eyes. He wore traditional Arab robes with unconscious elegance and had an air of quiet authority. Poirot inclined his head. "You are most considerate, Sheikh Ibrahim, but I confess I find all aspects of expedition life fascinating. The human element especially. Aha, you are a student of human nature. Then you must find us an interesting specimen. Here we are, British, Iraqi, all thrown together in pursuit of the past. Sometimes we cooperate beautifully. Sometimes," he smiled slightly, "sometimes the heat and isolation make tempers short. Isolation can reveal much about character, I think. Indeed, one cannot hide behind social niceties when one lives in such proximity. The true self emerges, for good or ill." After dinner, as the others dispersed to their various quarters, Professor Whitmore drew Poirot aside. "Well, first impressions?" Poirot stroked his moustaches thoughtfully. "There are tensions, certainly. Dr. Aldridge and Mrs. Sutcliffe. There is history there, I think. Young Mr. Brennan nurses grievances. Mademoiselle Clayton is afraid." "Afraid?" "Jennifer? Oh, yes. She conceals it well. But the fear, it is there. And Sheikh Ibrahim, he observes much, that one. He is not merely a liaison, I think. No, Ibrahim is a scholar in his own right. His family has been influential in this region for generations. He's been invaluable in dealing with the authorities and the local workers." "And the workers themselves? They are content, as far as I can tell. Hassan, our foreman, runs a tight ship. The men are well paid and the work is steady. Why do you ask?" "Because, Professor, in any community there are multiple layers of society. To understand what happens, one must look at all levels, not just the obvious ones." Whitmore nodded slowly. "I see, yes, that makes sense. Well, Hassan usually has his evening meal with his family in the workers' compound. I could arrange for you to meet him tomorrow." "Excellent. For now, however, I shall retire. The journey, it has fatigued even the constitution of Hercule Poirot. But tomorrow, the investigation, it begins in earnest." As Poirot made his way to his quarters, under a sky ablaze with stars, stars so bright and numerous they seemed almost artificial, he reflected on the evening's observations. A small, closed community under strain. Accusations and counter-accusations, missing objects and frayed tempers. And underneath it all, the shadow of something unnamed. Something that had prompted Professor Whitmore to write his careful letter of invitation. Tomorrow, he would begin asking his questions. But already the little grey cells were at work, noting inconsistencies, observing patterns. In Poirot's experience, murder often announced itself with just such subtle dissonances. The question was whether he had arrived in time to prevent it. Poirot rose early, as was his habit, performed his ablutions with meticulous care despite the primitive facilities, and emerged into the cool morning air. The compound was already astir. Local workers heading toward the excavation, the expedition members preparing for the day's work. He found Professor Whitmore in what served as the expedition office, a mud-brick room lined with shelves holding pottery sherds, notebooks and surveying equipment. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, good morning. Did you sleep well? As well as can be expected. The bed, it is not the Ritz, but one makes accommodations. Now, Professor, I would like to see this Fine's room where the seal was stolen. Of course. This way. The Fine's room was adjacent to the office, with sturdy doors and a lock. Inside, rough shelving held an organized array of artifacts. Pottery, beads, fragments of carved stone, and numerous small objects wrapped in tissue paper. Everything that comes out of the ground is brought here, recorded and catalogued, Whitmore explained. Mrs. Sutcliffe maintains the register and photographs significant pieces. The truly valuable items are sent to the Iraq Museum in Baghdad eventually, but we keep them here during the season. Poirot examined the room with interest. And the cylinder seal that vanished, from where exactly? This shelf? Whitmore indicated a section where small cardboard boxes were neatly arranged. It was in box 27. I discovered it missing when I was checking inventory 3 weeks ago. Who has keys to this room? Myself, Mrs. Sutcliffe, and Dr. Aldridge, though the room isn't always locked during the day when people are working here. Describe for me this seal, if you please. It was exquisite. Serpentine stone, about 2 inches long, carved with a scene of the king receiving tribute. 8th century BC, Assyrian, worth perhaps £500 to a collector, but to us, priceless for what it tells us about the period. And you are certain it was stolen, not merely misplaced? Quite certain. The box was there, but empty. Someone took the seal deliberately. Poirot bent to examine the shelf more closely, and there were no signs of forced entry, or none. Whoever took it had either a key or came during the day when the room was accessible. I see. And the other incidents, the missing drawings, the money. Jennifer's drawings disappeared from her tent. A portfolio containing preliminary sketches of the palace reconstruction. She found it 3 days later behind some storage boxes, as if it had been hidden. And Timothy's money, about £20, vanished from a tin box under his cot. That was never recovered. Poirot straightened up, brushing dust from his immaculate suit. It is curious, no? A valuable seal taken and not recovered. Drawings hidden but not destroyed. Money stolen entirely. These are 3 different crimes with 3 different purposes. I don't follow. The seal, that is valuable. Something to be sold. The drawings, someone wished to examine them, perhaps copy them, but not keep them. And the money, simple theft. 3 different motives, Professor, which suggests perhaps 3 different criminals. Or, he paused significantly, someone who wishes us to think exactly that. Whitmore looked troubled. I hadn't considered it that way. But surely you don't think... I think nothing yet. I merely observe. Now, I should like to see the excavation itself. They spent the morning touring the dig. Poirot, despite his protestations about dust, proved surprisingly sure-footed as Whitmore guided him through the trenches and exposed walls of the ancient palace. Dr. Aldridge was working in one of the deeper trenches, carefully cleaning a wall covered in cuneiform inscriptions. He looked up as they approached, shading his eyes against the sun. "Professor, Monsieur Poirot, come to see our discovery. If we do not disturb your work, Doctor." "Not at all. Look here. This is what makes it all worthwhile." He gestured to the wall with obvious pride. An administrative archive, lists of tribute, records of royal appointments, diplomatic correspondence. It's like reading the palace newsletter from 3,000 years ago. "You can truly understand all of this?" Poirot asked, examining the dense wedge-shaped markings. "Every word. Akkadian was my specialty at Oxford. This particular text details the appointment of a new provincial governor. Fascinating stuff. And your translations, they are always accurate." Aldridge's eyes narrowed slightly. "As accurate as any scholar's. Language is imperfect, Monsieur Poirot. Sometimes one must interpret nuance, consider context. But yes, I'm confident in my work. Someone has questioned this. Timothy Brennan likes to play amateur critic. He doesn't read cuneiform, but that doesn't stop him from having opinions." The bitterness was unconcealed. Mediocrity always resents excellence. That is harsh, surely, is it? The boy has no imagination, no instinct for the work. He's a cataloguer, nothing more. Yet he's always undermining me, suggesting my interpretations are convenient for my theories. Aldridge's hands clenched. If he had his way, we'd spend 5 years recording potsherds and never discover anything of significance. Poirot changed the subject smoothly. "And Mrs. Sutcliffe, you work closely with her, I understand?" "When necessary. She handles the photographic record. Conservation. Competent at her job, I suppose." His tone was dismissive. "But you were friendlier before, perhaps?" Aldridge shot him a sharp look. "I don't know what you've heard, Monsieur Poirot, but Vera and I had a professional disagreement. Nothing more. She became possessive about the finds, acted as if she owned them. It was inappropriate. Possessive in what way? Keeping things in her darkroom longer than necessary. Being secretive about her work. When I asked to see certain photographs, she'd make excuses." He shook his head. "Look, I don't want to speak ill of a colleague, but there's something not quite right about Vera lately. If things have gone missing, I'd look in her direction." After they left Aldridge to his work, Whitmore said quietly, "Marcus can be arrogant, but he's brilliant. His work on Assyrian administration is groundbreaking. And Mrs. Sutcliffe, is she truly possessive, or is that Dr. Aldridge's interpretation? I honestly don't know. Vera's always been conscientious, perhaps overly so, but lately she has been secretive. She spends hours in her darkroom, and when I ask what she's working on, she's evasive." They found Jennifer Clayton in the pottery shed, carefully drawing profiles of ceramic vessels. She looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Professor Monsieur Poirot, admiring our glamorous workspace." The shed was stifling hot despite the early hour. Jennifer's drawings were spread across a rough table, along with fragments of pottery arranged in careful rows. "Your work is most precise, Mademoiselle," Poirot observed, studying one of her illustrations. "It has to be. These drawings will be published, used by scholars for decades. Every line must be accurate." She set down her pen. "Though sometimes I wonder if accuracy matters when someone is going through your belongings. You mentioned last night that things had been disturbed." "More than disturbed. searched. My tent, my portfolios, even my personal trunk. Nothing taken except that one time, but definitely examined. She lowered her voice, glancing toward the door. I keep a diary, Monsieur Poirot. Private thoughts, you understand. Someone has been reading it. I can tell because the pages were out of order. That is a grave invasion of privacy. You suspect someone particular. She bit her lip. I shouldn't say, but Timothy has been acting strangely. He's always lurking about, watching people, and he was asking me odd questions about the palace reconstruction, details that were in the stolen drawings. Could he not simply be interested in your work? Perhaps. But combined with everything else, she shook her head. I don't know what to think anymore. I used to feel safe here. Now I lock my tent every night and sleep with my lamp burning. Poirot spent the afternoon interviewing Hassan ibn Rashid, the foreman, and several of the local workers. Hassan was a dignified man of about 40, with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. He spoke some English, supplemented by Sheikh Ibrahim, who kindly translated. The foreign archaeologists, they are good employers, Hassan said through the Sheikh. They pay fairly and treat us with respect. But lately there is tension. The workers feel it. What sort of tension? Arguments, harsh words between the English. And one of them, the young man, Mr. Brennan, he asked strange questions about how to sell antiquities in Baghdad, where the dealers are, who buys such things. Hassan's face was disapproving. This is not proper. All finds belong to Iraq. When did he ask these questions? Perhaps 1 month ago. I told him I knew nothing of such matters, but it troubled me. After Hassan departed, Sheikh Ibrahim lingered. Monsieur Poirot, you are investigating, yes? Professor Whitmore confides in me. He is worried. And you, Sheikh Ibrahim, what do you observe? I observe that this expedition, which began with such promise, has become poisoned. There is greed here and fear and something darker still. The ancient kings built this palace with blood and ambition. Perhaps those forces still linger in the ruins. You believe in curses, then? The Sheikh smiled. I believe in human nature, Monsieur Poirot, which can be curse enough. That evening, after dinner, Poirot took a solitary stroll around the compound. The night was cool after the scorching day, and the stars blazed overhead with that peculiar brilliance of the desert sky. In the distance, he could hear the workers in their separate encampment, voices raised in song. He was returning to his quarters when he noticed a light in the fines room. It was past 10 o'clock. The room should have been locked and dark, yet a dim glow showed through a crack in the door. Moving with surprising silence for a man of his build, Poirot approached. Through the gap he could see a figure, illuminated by a shielded lantern, examining the shelves methodically. Mrs. Sutcliffe. She worked quickly, opening boxes, checking their contents, occasionally making notes in a small book. Her movements were practiced, efficient, and clearly furtive. Poirot watched for several minutes, memorizing every detail. Finally, Mrs. Sutcliffe closed the last box, consulted her notebook, and moved toward the door. Poirot stepped into the shadows. She emerged, locked the door carefully, and hurried away toward her quarters without seeing him. Interesting. Most interesting indeed. The next morning, Poirot was taking his petit déjeuner, such as it was in this primitive setting, when Timothy Brennan approached. Looking haggard and agitated, Monsieur Poirot, might I have a word? In private? But of course, mon ami. Come, we shall walk. They strolled toward the excavation, now deserted in the early morning hour. Brennan kept glancing around nervously. I don't know who else to tell. The police in Baghdad wouldn't understand, and Professor Whitmore. He trailed off miserably. You may confide in Poirot. I am the soul of discretion. It's about the cylinder seal, the one that was stolen." Brennan's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think I know who took it. Indeed. This is most interesting. It was Dr. Aldridge. It had to be. He's been acting suspicious for weeks. Secretive, defensive, and he has the opportunity. He has a key to the finds room. But why would he steal from his own expedition? Money, of course. His academic reputation may be solid, but I happen to know he's deeply in debt. His wife left him last year and took half his assets. He's desperate." Brennan's words tumbled out in a rush. "And I've heard him talking to dealers in Baghdad. He could easily sell antiquities through the black market. You have proof of this?" "Well, no, not exactly. But it all fits. And there's more. I found something yesterday." He fumbled in his pocket and produced a small piece of paper. This was in the office, hidden behind the filing cabinet. "Look." Poirot examined the paper. It contained a list of items, cylinder seals, tablets, carved ivories, with prices noted beside each in pounds sterling. "You see? It's a shopping list for thieves. And the handwriting, I'm certain it's Aldridge's." "You are certain?" "Well, fairly certain. It's similar, at least." Brennan's confidence wavered slightly. "Don't you think it looks like his writing?" "I am no graphologist, mon ami, but tell me, why do you bring this to Poirot and not to Professor Whitmore?" "Because Whitmore won't listen. He thinks the sun rises and sets on Marcus Aldridge. And because he hesitated, because I'm afraid. If Aldridge is stealing and he knows I suspect him, well, these are isolated conditions. Accidents happen. You think he might harm you? I think he's capable of anything. You don't know him like I do. Beneath that scholarly exterior, there's a ruthless streak. He'd do whatever necessary to protect himself." After Brennan departed, still agitated, Poirot sought out Professor Whitmore in his office. "I need to see examples of everyone's handwriting," he announced without preamble. "Handwriting? Whatever for? It is a matter of eliminating possibilities. Your expedition notebooks, field journals, they would contain samples, yes? Well, yes. Everyone keeps notes. But really, Poirot? S'il vous plaît, professeur. You must trust the methods of Hercule Poirot." Reluctantly, Whitmore produced several notebooks. Poirot spent an hour examining them, comparing various hands. Then he studied the list Brennan had given him. Finally, he sat back, stroking his moustaches. "Voila! It is as I thought. What? What have you found? The handwriting on this list belongs not to Dr. Aldridge, but to young Mr. Brennan himself." "Timothy? But that's most revealing, yes. He brings me evidence against Dr. Aldridge, but the evidence, it is manufactured by his own hand. Why, to cast suspicion elsewhere? Or," Poirot's eyes gleamed, "perhaps Mr. Brennan's questions to Hassan about selling antiquities were not mere curiosity." "You think Timothy is the thief? I think, Professor, that we have arrived at a critical juncture. The tensions here, they build like steam in a kettle. Soon there will be an explosion. And when that happens," he left the sentence unfinished. "What should we do?" "You should do nothing. But Poirot, he will watch and wait. For in my experience, when the kettle boils over, that is when the truth reveals itself." That afternoon, Jennifer Clayton rushed into the main tent where several expedition members were gathered, her face pale with shock. "It's gone! The reconstruction, all my work, months of drawings, stolen." There was instant uproar. Professor Whitmore tried to calm her while the others clustered around, asking questions. "Are you certain?" Mrs. Sutcliffe demanded. "Did you look properly?" "Of course I looked properly. My entire portfolio is gone from my tent. The lock was forced." Dr. Aldridge stood apart, his expression sardonic. "How convenient. Another theft to add to the list. One begins to wonder if these things are genuine. or merely bids for attention. Jennifer whirled on him, her face flushing with anger. "How dare you? You think I'd destroy my own work? I think someone here is playing games, and I'm getting rather tired of it. Messieurs, mesdames." Poirot's quiet voice cut through the babble. "Please, everyone remain calm. Mademoiselle Clayton, you will show me your tent, yes?" Jennifer's tent was indeed in disarray. The lock on her trunk had been forced, and her belongings scattered about. But Poirot noticed something curious. The disorder was almost too thorough, too dramatic. "When did you last see the portfolio?" "This morning. I was working on drawings and left them in my tent when I went to lunch." "And between then and now, perhaps 2 hours, during which time everyone was at lunch or working at the site, so the thief had opportunity." He examined the forced lock. This was done with a tool, a screwdriver perhaps, or a strong knife. He spent several minutes searching the tent methodically. Finally, behind Jennifer's cot, he found a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He unwrapped it carefully. It was the missing cylinder seal. Jennifer gasped. "But I didn't. I've never seen that before." "Of course you haven't, mademoiselle. Someone has placed it here to incriminate you." He turned to Professor Whitmore, who had followed them. "You see how it is? First Jennifer is a victim, her drawings stolen. Then she becomes a suspect. The seal found in her possession. Very clever. But who? That, Professor, is what we must discover, before this game becomes more deadly than mere theft." Poirot called a meeting that evening after dinner. The entire expedition gathered in the mess tent, their faces showing various degrees of apprehension, hostility, and curiosity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, standing before them like a maestro before an orchestra, "I have observed you for 2 days. I have listened to your words and noted your silences, and I have concluded that this expedition suffers not from one problem, but from several, all intertwined like the threads of a very tangled carpet." "Get on with it," Dr. Aldridge said impatiently. "Some of us have work to do." "Ah, yes, the work. Always the work is the excuse, is it not?" "But what work exactly, Dr. Aldridge? Your brilliant translations? Or perhaps something else?" Aldridge half rose from his chair. "What are you implying?" "I imply nothing. I state facts. You have been corresponding with dealers in Baghdad. You have been inquiring about the market value of cylinder seals. And you have been most anxious that Mrs. Sutcliffe not have access to certain photographs. That's absurd. I'm a scholar, not a thief." "Indeed? Then perhaps you will explain this." Poirot produced a telegram. It arrived this morning, sent at my request to a colleague at the British Museum. It confirms that 3 Assyrian tablets from this site were offered for sale in London 2 months ago. The seller used your name, Dr. Aldridge. There was a collective gasp. Aldridge turned white, then red. "That's impossible!" "I never. No, you did not sell them. But someone wished us to believe you had. Someone who forged your correspondence, who used your reputation as cover." Poirot turned to Timothy Brennan. "Someone like you, perhaps, Mr. Brennan." The young man shot to his feet. "This is outrageous! You can't prove—" "I can prove that you wrote the list found in the office. I can prove that you asked Hassan about selling antiquities. And I can prove that you have been systematically attempting to implicate Dr. Aldridge. He deserved it! He's arrogant, dismissive, treating me like a servant." Brennan's composure cracked. "Yes, I made inquiries. Yes, I thought about selling artifacts. They're just old rubbish anyway, sitting in museums where no one appreciates them. Why shouldn't I profit from my work here? Because it is theft, mon ami, and illegal, and wrong." Poirot's voice was stern. "But you did not succeed, did you? Because the cylinder seal went missing before you could take it. Someone else beat you to the prize. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. And I think you have been searching for it ever since. You went through Mademoiselle Clayton's belongings, hoping she had taken it. You disrupted the fines room. You created chaos, hoping the seal would turn up in the confusion. Jennifer spoke up, her voice shaking. Then who did take it? And who stole my drawings? 2 excellent questions, mademoiselle. Shall we answer them? Poirot turned to Mrs. Sutcliffe. Madame, you have been most industrious at night, no? Working in the fines room when all others sleep. Mrs. Sutcliffe's face went rigid. I don't know what you mean. I observed you last night. You were checking inventory, comparing items against your notebook. Why? Because you knew something was amiss. You knew that artifacts were being substituted. Substituted? Professor Whitmore looked bewildered. What are you saying? I am saying that Mrs. Sutcliffe discovered that certain items in the fines room are not genuine. They are forgeries, excellent forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. The real artifacts have been replaced with copies and smuggled away. Is this not so, madam? Mrs. Sutcliffe's face crumpled. I only discovered it 3 weeks ago. I was photographing that cylinder seal and noticed something odd about the carving. Too precise, too sharp. Ancient stone should show wear. I tested it and found it was made within the last year. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Whitmore demanded. Because I didn't know how widespread it was. I started checking everything, working at night so as not to cause alarm. And I found that perhaps a dozen items have been replaced. The real ones are gone. Sacré bleu, Poirot murmured. And who had the skill to make such forgeries? Who had access to photograph the originals, create molds, produce copies that would fool even experts? The answer hung in the air, unspoken. Slowly, all eyes turned to Jennifer Clayton. She stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. No, you can't think. You are an artist, mademoiselle. A very skilled artist. Your reconstructions are praised for their accuracy and detail. Could you not apply those same skills to creating replicas of ancient seals? I would never. This is my life's work. These artifacts are precious to me. And yet, Poirot said gently, you have been very short of money, have you not? I made inquiries. Your father lost his fortune in the crash. You support your family on your modest salary here. How tempting it must have been to use your skills to create copies, sell the originals, and no one would know. The forgeries were so good they would pass inspection for years, perhaps decades. You're wrong. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I need money. Yes, I thought about it. Who wouldn't? But I didn't do it. I couldn't betray the professor's trust, betray archaeology itself. Then who? Whitmore's voice was anguished. If not Jennifer, then who has the skill? Poirot was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving from face to face. Then he said quietly, Perhaps we have been asking the wrong question, Professor. Not who has the skill, but who has the knowledge to coordinate such a scheme. Who understands the international antiquities market? Who has connections in multiple countries? Who would know precisely which items would be most valuable and hardest to trace? He turned to face Sheikh Ibrahim. The sheikh met his gaze steadily, his face impassive. You accuse me, Monsieur Poirot. I observe Sheikh Ibrahim, and what I observe is most interesting. You have been very helpful to this expedition, yes? Smoothing the way with authorities, handling local matters. But you have also been uniquely positioned to facilitate smuggling. You travel frequently between Iraq and Europe. You have family connections throughout the region, and you possess the sophistication to appreciate both the artistic and commercial value of these artifacts. This is preposterous, Whitmore protested. Ibrahim is a scholar, a gentleman. He is also, Poirot continued relentlessly, a man whose family fortune was largely confiscated by the new Iraqi government. A man who might feel that these artifacts, found on land his ancestors once ruled, have more claim to his loyalty than to government museums. Sheikh Ibrahim's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. Too perceptive, perhaps." "Then you admit it?" "I admit nothing. But I will say this. The British and French have been plundering Iraq's heritage for a century, filling their museums with Mesopotamian treasures while we kept nothing. Is it so wrong to want to preserve our history in our own hands, even if that preservation takes the form of selling to private collectors? Better private collections than foreign museum basements." His voice was bitter. "You know nothing of what it means to see your culture scattered across the world, labelled and catalogued by foreigners." "And yet," Poirot said, "you are not the forger. You coordinated, yes. You arranged sales. But you needed an artist." He turned back to Mrs. Sutcliffe. "You were friends with Dr. Aldridge once, were you not, madam? More than friends, perhaps? But when his marriage fell apart and he became desperate for money, you found his weakness. You proposed a scheme. He would help you access the finds, provide expertise on what was valuable. You would create the forgeries, and Sheikh Ibrahim would handle the sales." Mrs. Sutcliffe's face was white. "This is fantasy, is it? You spend hours in your darkroom, not just photographing, but working with plaster molds, creating impressions. You have all the chemicals, tools, and privacy you need, and you have the justification. Did you not tell yourself you were preserving these items in photographs before they vanished into museum storage? That no real harm was being done? The harm," Professor Whitmore said, his voice shaking, "is to truth, to scholarship, to everything archaeology stands for. Vera, how could you?" She looked at him with sudden defiance. "How could I easily? I've spent 30 years on expeditions like this, preserving everyone else's discoveries while receiving no credit, no recognition, no security for my old age. While men like Marcus build reputations on my work, I remain the invisible assistant. Well, I decided to secure my own future." "But the seal?" Jennifer interjected, confused. "The one that was supposedly stolen, was it ever real?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Sutcliffe said bitterly. "That was my mistake. I replaced it too quickly, before Sheikh Ibrahim could arrange a buyer. When Whitmore checked inventory, he noticed it missing. I panicked and hid it in my darkroom. But then you all started suspecting each other, and I saw an opportunity to let the chaos provide cover while I retrieved the original and sold it properly." "And my drawings?" Jennifer's voice was cold with fury. "Why steal those?" "Because they showed details of artifacts I'd already replaced. I needed to check them, make sure there were no inconsistencies that might give away my forgeries." She laughed harshly. "I planned to return them, but then Monsieur Poirot arrived and I realized I was running out of time. So I forced your trunk, hoping to make it look like a robbery, and I planted the seal to shift suspicion." Dr. Aldridge had been sitting in stunned silence. Now he spoke, his voice hollow. "Vera, you tried to frame me. All those hints about my debts, my supposed contacts with dealers. You would have been the perfect scapegoat, Marcus. The ambitious scholar fallen from grace. Everyone would have believed it." "But I did not believe it," Poirot said firmly. "Because the psychology, it was wrong. A man like Dr. Aldridge would steal openly, arrogantly, convinced of his right. He would not create this web of misdirection. No, this scheme required patience, bitterness, and the particular resentment of someone who has always been overlooked." He looked at Sheikh Ibrahim. "And you, sir? You orchestrated this out of ideology, perhaps, but you chose your partners poorly." The sheikh inclined his head slightly. "It seems I did, though I note, Monsieur Poirot, that you have much theory but little proof. Iraqi law is complex, and I have many friends in government." "That may be so, But this expedition is finished, no? The scandal will be immense, and that, I think, is punishment enough for all of you." Professor Whitmore slumped in his chair, looking suddenly old. 30 years of work, my reputation, all destroyed. "Not entirely, Professor," Poirot said more gently. "The forgeries can be examined, the damage assessed. Most of the artifacts are still here, merely replaced. With careful work, the deception can be limited. But the trust is broken. How can we continue? You cannot. Not this season. But archaeology is patient, no? The palace has waited 3,000 years. It will wait a little longer. The atmosphere in the compound over the next 24 hours was poisonous. Mrs. Sutcliffe confined herself to her quarters. Sheikh Ibrahim departed for Baghdad, ostensibly on business. Dr. Aldridge spoke to no one, throwing himself into his work with furious intensity. Jennifer Clayton walked around in a daze, still processing the revelation. Timothy Brennan, having been exposed as an attempted thief, skulked about like a whipped dog. Professor Whitmore spent the day in his office, beginning the painful process of documenting what had been compromised. The Iraqi Antiquities Department would have to be notified. The scandal would make headlines. Poirot observed it all with his characteristic detachment, but his little grey cells were not satisfied. Something remained unresolved. Some psychological discord that jangled against his sense of order. He found Mrs. Sutcliffe taking air outside her quarters in the relative cool of evening. "Madame, I must ask you something." She looked at him with dead eyes. "What does it matter now? When you created your forgeries, you worked from photographs, yes?" "Yes. I photographed each item multiple times from different angles, then used the images to create molds." "And you destroyed these photographs afterward?" "Most of them. Why?" "Because if someone else had access to your photographs, they might also create forgeries. They might, for instance, replace your excellent forgeries with poorer ones, keeping your versions to sell themselves." She stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that perhaps you are not the only one playing this game." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the fines room. Shouting, then a crash. Poirot ran, as much as his dignity permitted, toward the sound, arriving to find Dr. Aldridge and Timothy Brennan grappling violently. Jennifer Clayton stood pressed against the wall, her face terrified. "Stop this at once!" Professor Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. "Marcus, Timothy, separate immediately!" The two men broke apart, both breathing hard. Brennan's lip was split and bleeding. Aldridge's shirt was torn. "He attacked me!" Brennan shouted. "I came to check the pottery registers and he went mad." "Liar!" Aldridge's face was contorted with rage. "I found him in here with Jennifer's portfolio. He was burning it." All eyes turned to the small brazier in the corner where a fire smouldered. Half-burnt papers were visible in the flames. "The drawings," Jennifer whispered. "My reconstructions, why?" Brennan's face crumpled. "Because I had to. Don't you see? Those drawings showed where the most valuable artifacts were located in the palace structure. If anyone compared them to what's been taken..." He looked around wildly. "I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted enough money to pay my debts, to finally be independent. But then Vera started her scheme, and Sheikh Ibrahim got involved, and everything spiraled out of control." "You were working with them?" Whitmore asked, his voice hollow. "Not exactly. I discovered what they were doing. I thought I could force my way in, demand a share. But they refused, said I was too careless, too obvious. So I decided to start my own operation, take what I could before everything was discovered." His laugh was hysterical. "And now it's all ruined anyway." "Not quite all," a new voice said from the doorway. Sheikh Ibrahim stood there, and he was not alone. Behind him were 2 Iraqi police officers and a British consular official. "I thought it best," the sheikh said calmly, "to bring the authorities myself. Better that than have Monsieur Poirot's revelations reach them through gossip and rumour. I am prepared to make a full statement about my involvement." The consular official, a thin man with a severe expression, stepped forward. "I am Reginald Pemberton from His Majesty's Consulate in Baghdad. This is Captain Yusuf of the Iraqi police. We'll need statements from everyone. This is a very serious matter. Theft of Iraqi national treasures." The next several hours were chaotic. Statements were taken. The fines room was sealed. Mrs. Sutcliffe was formally arrested, as was Timothy Brennan. Sheikh Ibrahim, due to his aristocratic connections, was allowed to remain at liberty pending investigation, though his diplomatic work was clearly finished. Dr. Aldridge was questioned extensively, but eventually cleared of involvement. Jennifer Clayton's statement corroborated that she had been an innocent victim. By midnight, a strange calm had settled over the compound. The police had departed, taking Mrs. Sutcliffe and Brennan with them. The expedition was officially suspended pending investigation. Poirot sat with Professor Whitmore in the office, drinking sweet tea prepared by the Iraqi cook. "I can't believe it," Whitmore said for perhaps the 20th time. "Vera, Timothy, Ibrahim, people I trusted, people I thought I knew. That is the eternal puzzle of human nature, Professor. We are all mysteries even to ourselves. The pressures of want, ambition, resentment, they reveal aspects of character we did not know existed. But how did you know? When did you realize? I did not know, not completely, until the end. I suspected Mrs. Sutcliffe from the moment I saw her in the fines room at night. Her explanation of checking for forgeries was plausible, but the psychology was wrong. If she had merely discovered the deception, she would have told you immediately. That she worked in secret suggested she had something to hide. And Brennan? Young Mr. Brennan, he was obvious from the start. His questions to Hassan, his resentment of Dr. Aldridge, his clumsy attempt to frame the doctor, all pointed to amateur criminality. He was the loose thread that, when pulled, began to unravel the larger scheme. And Sheikh Ibrahim? Poirot sighed. Ah, that is more complex. The Sheikh, he is genuinely conflicted. He believes, perhaps rightly, that Iraq's heritage should remain in Iraqi hands. But he chose the wrong method. Theft is still theft, no matter how noble the supposed motive. What will happen to them? Mrs. Sutcliffe will face trial, certainly. Prison, I suspect. Mr. Brennan also. The Sheikh, Poirot shrugged. He has connections. He may avoid prosecution, but his reputation, his position, those are finished. Sometimes that is punishment enough. And the expedition? That, Professor, must be your decision. But if I may offer advice, you are not responsible for the crimes of others. Your scholarship, your dedication to proper archaeology, those remain untainted. When the scandal dies down, you will be able to continue. Perhaps with more caution, more oversight, but continue nonetheless. Whitmore managed a weak smile. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I don't know what we would have done without you. You would have muddled through as the English always do, but Poirot, he perhaps accelerated the inevitable conclusion. The next morning, as Poirot was preparing for his departure to Baghdad, Dr. Aldridge sought him out. Monsieur Poirot, a word? They walked together to the edge of the excavation, where the exposed palace walls stood silent in the morning sun. I wanted to thank you, Aldridge said stiffly, for clearing my name, for not believing Brennan's lies. But of course, Doctor, the evidence against you was manufactured and obvious to anyone who looked carefully. Even so, in the confusion, with emotions running high, he gestured helplessly. I could have been ruined. You are not an easy man, Dr. Aldridge. You are arrogant, dismissive of those you consider inferior. These are not admirable qualities, Aldridge stiffened. I don't, but, Poirot continued, you are also brilliant, dedicated to your work, and fundamentally honest. You would steal ideas, perhaps, or claim credit too readily. But you would not steal artifacts. The psychology is wrong. You understand people very well, Monsieur Poirot. It is my profession. And speaking of understanding, he fixed Aldridge with a penetrating stare. You and Mrs. Sutcliffe were lovers once, were you not? Aldridge looked away. Briefly. Many years ago, before my marriage. It ended badly. Vera wanted more than I could give. When I married someone else, she was hurt, bitter. And when you returned to expeditions, divorced and struggling, she saw her opportunity for revenge, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe. All I know is that she went from professional colleague to actively undermining me. Little comments, subtle sabotage. I thought she'd simply never forgiven me. I didn't realize she'd gone this far. The human heart, Doctor. It is more complex than any cuneiform tablet, and far harder to translate accurately. After Aldridge left, Poirot made his way to Jennifer Clayton's tent. She was packing her belongings, preparing for the expedition's dissolution. Mademoiselle, you are leaving? What choice do I have? The expedition is finished. I'll need to find other work. She smiled sadly. At least my drawings weren't completely destroyed. I can salvage some of them for publication. You are talented, mademoiselle. You will find another position, perhaps, though this scandal won't help my reputation. You were a victim, not a perpetrator. That will be made clear. She looked at him curiously. Monsieur Poirot, may I ask you something? How did you know Mrs. Sutcliffe was lying when she claimed she'd only discovered the forgeries recently? Because of the timing, mademoiselle. She claimed she discovered the deception 3 weeks ago. Yet the first theft, the cylinder seal, occurred exactly 3 weeks ago. If she had just discovered the forgeries, why would an item go missing at that precise moment? The psychology suggested instead that she had been conducting her scheme for months, perhaps longer, and the seal's disappearance was part of her plan, not a response to discovery. I see. And you knew all along that I was innocent? Not all along, but your reactions, your fear, your genuine distress. These were not the responses of a guilty party. A criminal would have been calmer, more controlled. You, mademoiselle, wore your emotions on your sleeve. It was most convincing, she laughed despite herself. I'm not sure whether that's a compliment or not. It is merely an observation, and now I must make my farewells. Professor Whitmore insisted on driving Poirot to Baghdad himself, the two men making the journey in contemplative silence for much of the way. As the city's minarets came into view, Whitmore finally spoke. What will you tell people about what happened here, Monsieur Poirot? But I will tell them that an archaeological expedition faced criminal activity which was exposed and punished. Nothing more. The details, the personal elements, those need not be public. You're very kind. I am practical, Professor. Scandal helps no one. Better to focus on the facts. Theft was attempted. It was stopped. The perpetrators face justice. Your reputation, properly managed, can survive this. I hope so. I've devoted my life to this work. To have it end this way. It does not end, Professor. It merely pauses. The palace will wait for you, and when you return, you will do so with wisdom earned through adversity. They parted at the hotel, where Poirot would spend the night before catching his train to Damascus. Whitmore shook his hand warmly. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for everything. It has been my pleasure, Professor, and who knows, perhaps one day I shall read of your great discoveries in the Times. Until then, be well. 3 months later, Hercule Poirot sat in his London flat, reading the morning newspaper. Captain Hastings, visiting for lunch, looked over his shoulder. "I say, that's about your Iraqi expedition, isn't it?" The article was brief, but factual. Archaeological theft case concluded. The trial of Mrs. Vera Sutcliffe and Mr. Timothy Brennan, charged with theft of Iraqi national treasures from the Al-Qadir excavation site, concluded yesterday at the Baghdad Criminal Court. Both defendants were found guilty. Mrs. Sutcliffe received a sentence of 5 years imprisonment. Mr. Brennan received 3 years. Sheikh Ibrahim al-Mansour, who was charged with facilitating antiquities smuggling, received a suspended sentence and substantial fine due to his cooperation with authorities. Professor Edmund Whitmore of the British School of Archaeology stated that the Al-Qadir expedition will resume next season with enhanced security measures. Several significant artifacts have been recovered and will be displayed at the Iraq National Museum. So, it all worked out in the end, Hastings observed. After a fashion, mon ami, justice has been served. The criminals are punished. Order is restored. But you don't sound entirely satisfied. Poirot set down the paper and steepled his fingers. I am satisfied with the solution, yes, but the case itself, it leaves a bitter taste. There was no elegant murder, no brilliant criminal mastermind. Only greed, resentment, and disappointed ambitions. Isn't that what most crime is, though? Not grand passions, but petty grievances? You are wise, Hastings. Yes, that is the truth that Poirot sometimes forgets. We like to think of crime as opera. Great emotions, dramatic confrontations. But often it is merely sad. Mrs. Sutcliffe spent decades in the shadow of men less talented than herself, until bitterness consumed her judgment. Young Brennan wanted shortcuts to success rather than earning it honestly. Sheikh Ibrahim confused legitimate grievance with justification for theft. And the others, Dr. Aldridge and Miss Clayton, they survive. Dr. Aldridge has published a paper on the palace inscriptions that is receiving much acclaim. Jennifer Clayton is working on a dig in Egypt, I understand. Both will recover from their ordeal. Thanks largely to you. Poirot waved this away. I merely untangled the threads. The pattern was always there, waiting to be seen, though I confess. He paused, his eyes distant. There was a moment when I feared someone might attempt murder. The tensions were high, the emotions volatile. If I had arrived even a few days later. But you didn't. You arrived in time. You prevented disaster, perhaps. Or perhaps the characters involved were not capable of murder. There is a line, Hastings, between theft and violence. Some cross it, some do not. He brightened slightly. But come, we should not dwell on melancholy. You must tell me about this young lady you mentioned, the one you met at your club. Oh, well, she's rather special, actually. Name's Dulcie, and she has the most marvelous laugh. As Hastings launched into his story, Poirot leaned back in his chair with a small smile. The case of the tigress deception was closed. The expedition would continue. Life would go on. And somewhere in the Iraqi desert, an ancient palace waited in the sun, keeping its own 3,000-year-old secrets, indifferent to the small dramas of those who sought to uncover them. The mysteries of Mesopotamia would endure long after the mysteries of the human heart had been forgotten. But for Hercule Poirot, it was the human heart that would always be the greatest puzzle and the most worthy of his attention.